Welcome to our program, General Ryan.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
I would like to begin our conversation with the war in Ukraine and current situation. Ukraine has intensified its long-range drone attacks on Russia's oil refining capacity, destroying at least 20% of Russia's oil refining sector. What is your assessment of this Ukraine strategy and its implications for the outcome of this war and Russia's ability to fund this effort?
Well, Ukraine's ability to strike Russia deep, and to strike its oil industry has been something it's been developing for some time, and it's been slowly but surely improving the range, the size of the warheads and the accuracy of its long-range strike weapon systems. I think what we've seen in the past month is the real maturation of Ukraine's long-range strike capability. And I think it has matured to the point where it is really hurting Russia now. They will never admit it, but we're seeing very significant fuel shortages in many parts of Russian territory. We'll probably see shortfalls in their ability to export oil, and that will have an impact, maybe not in the short term, but in the long term and medium term, on Russia's war economy. That is a good thing, because every way that Putin can be hurt is a way for Ukraine to bring him to the negotiating table and force him to concede at negotiations in a way favourable to Ukraine.
From your perspective, would this be enough to force Putin to make any kind of concessions or compromise during negotiations?
Well, I think it is one part of the many things that need to be done to force Putin to the negotiating table and then to negotiate in some semblance of good faith. I mean, I don't think Ukraine should ever trust Putin, but I think these long-range strikes will be part of what Ukraine brings to the table, along with the diplomacy of European nations, along with economic sanctions, along with Ukraine's ongoing capacity to really hurt Russia's ground forces on the battlefield. It may be making small gains on the battlefield, but it is still taking very, very large manpower losses, and even Russia can't do that forever.
Let's cover the situation on the ground in Ukraine and the strategic picture of this war. Where are we in this war right now?
Well, I think it's still a pretty dynamic war, even though there are some who think the Eastern Front is static. Is far from that. We've seen both Russia and Ukraine make advances over the last few weeks. I mean, I think a lot of people pay attention to what Russia's doing, but we really need to pay attention to some of the gains, some of the counterattacks of the Ukrainian armed forces in eastern Ukraine. The Russians have largely given up on their northeastern campaign around Sumy and are redeploying forces to the east. So it remains a very dynamic battlefield. We are seeing drones still play an important role. The unmanned systems force for Ukraine is building the drone wall. But unfortunately, the Russians and their Rubicon force has demonstrated an ability to improve its drone operations as well. So it's very dynamic. I think you've got to really keep watching it every single day, because the situation does change quickly, even if large amounts of territory aren't changing hands every day.
There are also lots of discussions on how long can Russia sustain this war effort. Some analysts say for another 6-12 months. What is your take on that? For how long can Russia sustain this war due to current economic situation and high losses on the ground?
Well, nation states, especially large ones, are very resilient. I think Ukraine has shown that in spades in the last few years. It's very hard to break a country, but it's harder to break them when they're fighting for their very survival. That is what Ukraine is doing. Russia is not doing that. Russia did not have to engage in this war. Russia's war against Ukraine has got nothing to do with the survival of Russia, but the way Russia has fought it has made fighting the war essential to the survival of the Putin regime. And that, I think, is the major issue at hand here. I think the Putin regime has staked its survival on this war, and it is in a position where it will have to continue fighting until it no longer can fight.
Do you feel that we are getting closer to the end of the fighting, or at least to a ceasefire?
Well, I hope so, and no one wants that more than the Ukrainian people. But as polls have shown in Ukraine, despite no one wanting peace more than people in Ukraine, they don't want peace at any price. People in Ukraine understand what it's like to live under the boot of Russians. Many of those are already doing so in territories occupied illegally by Russia. So whilst Ukrainians want peace, they won't do so at any price. And I think there'll be some way to go before Russia demonstrates any inclination even to have a conversation with Ukraine. I mean, President Putin has made it very clear. He doesn't like President Zelensky, doesn't want to talk with him. I think we'll see this fighting continue at least into 2026.
Also, according to Bloomberg, Vladimir Putin would like to capture the 4 regions of Ukraine, also the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. Also, during the negotiations between Trump, Putin, and President Zelensky, Putin suggested that he could be ready to reach a deal if Ukraine withdraws from the Donbass, the whole Donbass region. Do you feel that the Donbass region right now is a key priority for the Russia's army, and would they also be able to at least try to conduct offensive to also capture the another 2 regions, the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions?
I think it's very unlikely Russia could do that. I mean, we're in the 4th year of this war. In that entire period, Russia has only managed to be able to capture 12% of Ukrainian territory. It occupied 7% before that. The Russian military has not demonstrated the capacity to make large breakthroughs or take large amounts of land. That is very unlikely in the coming months in the lead up to winter. So it will be restricted to using infiltration tactics to take small amounts of land. But I think the areas that Ukraine is defending in eastern Ukraine at the moment will be very, very difficult for the Russians to take, particularly the fortress belt. And there is no reason Ukraine should give that up. It should use every inch of ground to make Russia hurt as much as possible.
Do you feel that Vladimir Putin's inner circle is also looking to find this way out of this conflict, of this war?
Well, I think they would like to, because they probably understand better than Putin that, being at war forever increases their chances in being collateral damage in some kind of coup in the future. And at some point you might see another Prigozhin arrive who decides that Putin is no longer the person they want in charge, and those around Putin would be caught in the blast area of such an activity. So for no other reason, I don't think there's any ethical concerns there. I don't think they care about the Russians or Ukrainians dying. I think for their own future prospects, I think some around Putin would like to see this war over.
What are also the chances for full-scale or another not full-scale mobilization inside Russia to try to capture more land and try to just present it as a victory of the Russian army?
Well, the Russians didn't do it in 2022 because of domestic political reasons, and the conditions in Russia for such a mobilization have only worsened since that time. The Russian people would look on such a mobilization even more dimly than they would have 3 years ago. So I think that's very unlikely. The Russians, however, are generally able to recruit all the soldiers they need on a monthly basis. They have had to pay more for them and give them higher bonuses. Now, whether they can continue that into the next year or a couple of years remains to be seen. But I don't think they need to resort to mobilisation. They're able to recruit their way to replace all their losses on the battlefield.
Let's cover also the recent briefing between Russia's generals and General Gerasimov. He has presented so-called fake map with Odessa and Mykolaiv regions were presented as sized territories by Russia. However, these territories are not sized by the Russian army. Do you see this as a message or just an indication of Russia's war aims, war objectives for the next year, this and next year?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. It's probably a combination of Gerasimov doesn't always get the full picture of what's going on the battlefield. It's partly the Russians trying to message that a Russian victory is inevitable. We all know that is not the case. And I think it's probably bad staff work by the Russians. The Russian staff don't tolerate failure, won't admit mistakes. So I think it's a combination of all those reasons. But it was a pretty fantastical map, which didn't really represent the situation on the ground.
Let's also cover current Donald Trump's efforts to reach a ceasefire deal or a peace deal over Ukraine. US President Donald Trump overnight said that he would continue to try to reach a peace deal over Ukraine. However, he says that both President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin are not ready yet for this deal to be made. What is your assessment of this Trump's efforts, and don't you think that he is too optimistic about this?
Well, I think the US president's efforts so far have only made things worse. I don't think he's made a measurable contribution to achieving peace. I don't think anything he's done has demonstrated a real willingness to do the hard work. He certainly wants peace and he wants a Nobel Peace Prize, but he doesn't want to do the tough things that are required to achieve peace. We know now there is only one pathway to peace. That is making Russia hurt so much that they will come to the negotiating table. And we can only do that with more American support, more European support, and more support from countries like my own.
Don't you feel that President Trump has been played by Vladimir Putin?
Absolutely. He's been manipulated, whether it's a manipulation that he's been happy to go through for the MAGA base or has been unwilling to experience. He has definitely been manipulated by a master human intelligence operator that Vladimir Putin is. It's tragic to see that the President of the United States has been manipulated so terribly by the President of Russia, and that he has continued to issue these ultimatums, and when the ultimatums run out, he does nothing at the end of them. So the Russians have the measure of Donald Trump, and I think the reason why Vladimir Putin was smiling when he got on the plane after the Alaska summit is because not only did Putin have Trump's measure, I think Putin understood that the rest of the world saw that as well.
And do you see the outcome of the summit in Alaska as a big win for Vladimir Putin because he has avoided sanctions and also obtained this opportunity to continue his war without any kind of severe consequences?
I think the Alaska summit was a great victory for Russia. Putin left no sanctions, no tariffs against Russia, wasn't arrested for being a war criminal, which he is. And then he's now jetted off to Beijing to be feted like a hero by the president of China and of North Korea and of other countries. So unlike the situation 3 years ago where he was ostracized from the world community, he has been welcomed back by many countries around the world, unfortunately, including China, including India, and unfortunately, including the United States in Alaska.
Let's cover also this big debate on security guarantees for Ukraine. There have been many news reports about the possibility of deploying the third country neutral force to Ukraine, creating demilitarized zone and the deployment of European allies, France, UK, they both are ready to deploy its own peacekeeping force to Ukraine in case of a ceasefire. What is your strategic assessment of this effort and also the possibility of involving in that, including the third country, neutral country?
Well, I think getting security guarantees from other countries is important for Ukraine. I think the presence of third-party countries, be it France or Germany or the United Kingdom or others in Ukraine, would be important. But those countries would need to have a plan that, well, if Putin attacked them, what are they going to do? The worst thing that could happen is if there was a ceasefire and these countries had peacekeeping troops there, they were attacked by the Russians and they withdrew. That would be a catastrophe. So we need to really work our way through what's the worst that could happen to these troops in the event of a ceasefire. Ultimately, the best security guarantee that Ukraine can have is Ukraine. Ukraine's indigenous defence industry, Ukraine's military forces, which have proven themselves to be equal or the best in the world, that ultimately will be the foundational security guarantee for Ukraine into the future.
Also, Financial Times reported that also US could commit to the security guarantee by providing so-called backstop to European forces or any kind of air support. What is your take on that? And do you have this feeling that the US would commit to this effort?
Well, it's hard to know. There's certainly a strong desire for the US to disentangle itself from Ukraine and from European security more broadly, although its actions on the ground show that it's still deeply involved in the security architecture of Europe, and we might hope that that continues. I think the US will continue to do things like provide intelligence, provide economic support, provide weapons, even though they're now being having to be procured from the US rather than being given by the US. I think that would be the minimum that the US would probably do in the event of there being a ceasefire. Whether they might provide more air defence troops or air cover, I think would be a very interesting conversation, because once again, if Russia decides to have a shot at an American plane, that means America and Russia would be at war. I'm not sure whether Putin wants to avoid that, but I have a sense he does, and certainly the Americans would like to avoid that.
Let's also cover the recent summit in China and this big military parade. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, and also the president of China, Xi Jinping, they all both visited this military parade. What does this mean from a military point of view? I mean, in the matter of this weaponry and all vehicles presented by Chinese side.
Well, at first glance, it was a very spectacular and impressive parade. And there was a very wide array of land, air, and maritime weapons on display, including nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missiles. So China really showed that it's come of age as a modern military force. I think importantly, it demonstrated that it is capable of researching, designing and building all the military equipment, all the munitions, the rockets and everything else that it requires as a 21st century military organisation. This gives it a lot of agency in its own national security. It gives them a lot of flexibility in any future war, because unlike other examples we've seen recently, foreign countries can't give it weapons and then restrict the use of those weapons. Ukraine has learned that lesson over the last few years. I think China has ensured that it could never be in that kind of position and is building everything itself.
Also, the leaders of China, Russia, and North Korea, Donald Trump has commented on this matter. He accused them of getting ready, of preparing a conspiracy against the United States. What is your take on that? And don't you think that Trump's presidency just making the US weaker during this another presentation of power from Chinese side?
Well, I think there's no doubt that the axis of Iran, North Korea, China and Russia see what they believe is a historic opportunity to significantly degrade, to corrode the US leadership that it's demonstrated since the end of the Second World War, to ensure that the influence of the international system that grew out of the end of the Second World War, largely fostered by the United States, is weakened, and to give other powers, such as Russia and China, their own spheres of influence, where they are free from the economic, diplomatic, and military influence of the United States and its allies. The actions of the Trump administration in the last few months is probably helping them along the way to that goal. But I think even if the Trump administration wasn't doing what it's doing, these countries would still be collaborating to destroy and to weaken democratic powers around the world.
Also, yes, President Trump has directed U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth to strengthen the deterrence of China amid this military parade in China. Don't you think that the increased support for Ukraine would be the best option for Pentagon to also deter Chinese side?
Absolutely, it would be. And if I was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs receiving that direction, I'd be saying, well, what do you think I've been doing up till now? I mean, they have a China first policy, but I think walking away from Ukraine, if the US does that, it is only encouraging and provoking China. It's not deterring it. But by supporting Ukraine and helping Ukraine, if not defeat Russia, but at least bring Russia to the negotiating table under favourable terms for Ukraine, that is one of the best ways that it could possibly deter Chinese aggression and adventurism throughout the Indo-Pacific. I'm not sure whether that's fully occurred to some in the US administration, but I wish it would.
Let's cover our final question regarding this summit in China. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping, they both have discussed the possibility of living up to 150 years. What is your take on that? Do you see this as indications that Vladimir Putin is not yet ready to depart from power? He would like to stay in power for his whole life and would like to live 150 years, at least more than 100 years.
Yes, it was one of the more bizarre activities that happened in the last 24 hours. But the fact that they were talking about this indicates that it certainly occurred to them, and they're certainly working on ways to ensure that they live as long as they possibly can. Both these men are in their 70s. In the normal way of the world, they probably have a lifespan somewhere in their 80s. Both of them clearly want to stay in power at least until that time, but would like to extend their time on this planet. And I think at least initially it demonstrates that neither Putin nor Xi are going anywhere at this point in time. We're going to have to deal with these two men for some time to come.
Thank you, General Ryan, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.